right, hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Nicole with the STARS Public Sector Hub team. Today's webinar topic is navigating skills for strategies in the new year. And we're excited to be joined by some incredible organizations today. We have Jobs for the Future, JFF, a national nonprofit organization that aims to improve the American education and workforce systems to promote economic advancement. We're also joined by the Volcker Alliance, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering the public sector workforce to solve the challenges facing our nation. And finally, we have Louisiana State Civil Service, the central human resources agency for the state of Louisiana. And in just a moment, you're going to see a quick poll pop up on your screen. We would love to see who is in the room today, and how you found out about this event. So please take a moment to fill out the poll. Today's agenda includes a brief overview of Opportunity at Work and the STARS Public Sector Hub, and then we're going to turn it to our speakers with JFF, Opportunity at Work, and the Volcker Alliance and Louisiana State Civil Service. And throughout this webinar, feel free to type your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. We will be lifting up those questions from that at the end of the presentation. Also, please know that this webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a copy of the recording and other assets afterwards. All right, here is a quick look at our mission at Opportunity at Work. We are a nonprofit focused on empowering STARS, or workers who are skilled through alternative routes rather than a bachelor's degree. Across the US, STARS represent an incredible talent pool of over 70 million individuals. They've built their expertise through pathways such as community college, military service, workforce training programs, or on-the-job experience. And in the public sector alone, there are more than 9 million STARS who are contributing to federal, state, and local government roles. Of course, we're eager to see that number continue to rise and also see upward mobility for STARS in the public sector. So we're committed to providing you with skills-first strategies and resources to engage this vital group of workers. And in 2024, we launched the STARS Public Sector Hub, which is a digital resource hub crafted for leaders of local, state, and federal government. This hub provides access to valuable resources, including our data and insights, research, and narrative design tools. And it's also more than just a resource library. It's a collaborative learning community where public sector leaders can exchange insights and strategies for advancing skills-first practices and leveraging STAR talent. If you have not joined yet, membership is completely free for public sector employees, and it grants you access to our exclusive events and the latest tools and resources. And you can scan this handy QR code to join, and we'll also include a link in our follow-up email. And for those of you who are outside of government, nonprofits can also join us as partners. There's a short interest form on our website, and we review these quarterly to ensure alignment with our mission to promote skills-first hiring in the public sector. And here are the incredible people you'll be meeting with shortly. Their full bios are on our webpage for the event on the Hub website. We have Paige Bongiorno, Director with the STARS Public Sector Hub at Opportunity at Work. Blair Corcoran de Castillo, Vice President, Public Sector and Policy at Opportunity at Work. Taylor Magg, Director of Workforce Policy at JFF. Peter Morrissey, Senior Director, Talent and Strategy at the Volcker Alliance. And Nicole Tucker, Chief Operating Officer at Louisiana State Civil Service. All right, I'm going to turn it over with Taylor at JFF to kick us off.
Thanks, Nicole, and hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Opportunity at Work, for hosting this critical discussion as we kick off 2025. So I have the pleasure of doing a little level setting before going into some policy activity and movement on this issue at the state and federal level. A lot of these facts I go through, Opportunity at Work is the research behind this, and many of the audience members may already know, but it's worth just re-emphasizing for the point of today's conversation. So the US labor market right now is still, we're in a very tight economy. It's very low, which at just 4.1% unemployment as of December. So there are more workers right now. There are more jobs than there are workers to fill them. Right now, the most recent data shows that there's 68 qualified workers for every 100 open jobs. So you're seeing this mismatch play out in our economy. And it's really underscoring a systemic issue that Opportunity at Work and the other partners on this call are trying to solve, and one that demands immediate transformative change. While there's many reasons for this mismatch, there's a lot of social reasons that are happening. There's a lot of issues around labor market participation since the pandemic. One challenge that we're all working to address is recognizing the reliance on the four-year degree as the primary measure of job readiness in our economy. We know that majority of employers, public and private and nonprofit to date, have really used the degree as a proxy for job preparedness, even though the majority of workers in our labor market do not have a four-year degree. And so we're really seeing that mismatch between what people are looking for when hiring and what workers actually have as a credential when they're looking for jobs. I thought this was a really powerful data point from Opportunity at Work. As a result of this, the research shows that millions of people, the stars that Nicole was just referring to, who lack a four-year degree, have demonstrated skills that suit them for roles commanding salaries at least 50% higher than their current job. So this also demonstrates that many of these people we're talking about have really strong skill sets, are actually ready to enter in a lot of high demand jobs of today, yet because they don't have the exactly right credential, they are limited from the opportunities that they can receive. So I think that's just a really important point to keep talking about as we go into our conversation today. Clearly, from this, degree-based hiring is limiting opportunity for a majority of the nation's workforce. It's important we solve this problem now, especially with the accelerating pace of technological change, which is expected to reshape industries and job requirements faster than ever before. On top of that, we also know that there are new jobs in infrastructure, energy, and semiconductor sectors being created every day. But again, with these new jobs coming, we still don't have the workers ready to fill these open positions. So it's clear our country needs to better recognize workers' existing skills while also supporting them in their skill development journey to ensure they're prepared for these jobs that are in demand today, but also of tomorrow. I also thought this data point is pretty powerful. The US talent pool would increase by 19 times if skills-based approaches were universally adopted. So we'd be seeing a much more active participation in our labor market from workers across educational backgrounds. So I will just say, we also know that in addition to just us meeting the moment and knowing that the time is now to address this major challenge, we also know that public and policymaker opinion is changing around traditional higher education, with many questioning the cost, the time, and the return on investment that a four-year degree holds again today in our labor market. I will say, individuals are looking for options that are meeting their needs. As we know, our student body and workers are getting older. They often have dependents, are already working. They need something that's more flexible and affordable. At the same time, I think policymakers are wary that these types of things are affecting their constituencies on a day-to-day basis. And so how are we creating a labor market, but also a post-secondary system that is more responsive to individual needs while also being responsive to what employers needs? I will say before moving to the next slide, Nicole, federal policy especially still very much kind of overemphasizes the traditional four-year degree pathway, with investments being much, much more for four-year degree paths and subsidies for students participating in those pathways than for other skill development opportunities. So that is something just to keep in the back of your mind as we're talking today. We're seeing some shifts that I'll get into in a second, but on the whole, we're still seeing that kind of promotion of the four-year degree path as being kind of the gold standard, while other opportunities are limited. And again, that can affect how people then progress in work and in their career. Nicole, next slide, please. So, I kind of just went in to some of the changing mindsets that we're seeing in the public. But I will say, I know I just started off a little bit on the negative side on what we're facing, but there are a lot of positives that are coming out right now. Again, because of leadership like Opportunity at Works and other folks on this call, the tide's beginning to turn. We know a growing number of employers are adopting skills-based hiring practices. Not only that, they're increasing investments in talent development outside their firm, but also internally at their organization to support people on internal career tracks, which is really exciting to see. And like I mentioned, they're dropping four-year degree requirements from jobs that don't need them, recognizing that non-degree workers can perform just as well as their degree holding counterparts. And I just want to add this tool also, something that's pretty powerful is, as people are thinking about what jobs they want to go into, employers have recognized through surveys that workers are 75% more likely to stay at a company that offers some of these talent development strategies than they are if the employer does not offer them. So again, it's just kind of the employers are recognizing not only how this is critical to access talent, but also retain them. Next slide, please, Nicole. Awesome. So here's some policy momentum. Again, luckily the tide is turning. We are seeing employers adopt this. It's really exciting. And we're also seeing states really lead the way in following suit. Opportunity at Work, again, has done a great job of kind of tracking what states have done what. And to date, there are more than 20 states that have taken action to reduce degree requirements in public sector jobs. So whether that's through an executive order or other policy avenues, they are making sure that for the state government roles, whether at the state or local or regional level, they are reducing degree requirements from jobs that don't need them. Because of this state momentum, we've seen a lot of action at the federal level. Both the previous Trump administration and the Biden administration took significant steps toward modernizing federal hiring practices by establishing executive orders that, again, remove degree requirements from federal jobs that don't need them. While progress was made there, I will say there were some just limiting factors that are worth noting. It did not include contract workers, which we know are a huge part of government work and make up a huge workforce, especially in the DMV or DC, Maryland, Virginia region of the country. I will also say that while these EOs kind of created this opportunity, the implementation has been pretty slow. And so there's a lot of other efforts to ensure that uptake from the federal government to ensure that skills-based hiring is underway. I also want to mention the legislative side of our federal government, which is really, really important because they make laws that govern everyone and that are adopted across the country. And so I wanted to just mention briefly, and happy to go into more detail in the chat or later in the conversation on some of the major bills that we've seen from last Congress that are expected to continue efforts this Congress, and also elements of those policies for awareness. So the first is probably the biggest one. A Stronger Workforce for America Act was a bipartisan bill that almost made it through at the end of last year. Didn't quite cross the finish line. But this would reauthorize our Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, the policy that oversees our public workforce system across the country. There are many elements of this reauthorization that are worth noting, but for purposes of this call, I want to focus on the skills-based strategies that the bill would implement if passed. First, it would increase the emphasis on skills-based hiring through embedding competency-based assessments in the regional workforce systems intake process for clients that they're supporting. It would require local boards to provide technical assistance to employers seeking to implement skills-based hiring practices. And it would encourage the development of statewide skills-based initiatives in the unified state planning process to encourage not only these governor EOs that are going out, but ensuring that agencies across the board are working together to implement these practices effectively. We also saw a lot of standalone bills outside of reauthorization. So one, again, that Opportunity at Work was major partners on a lot of this legislation. I'm just going to go through it quickly. First was the Federal Jobs for STARS Act of 2024. This policy was spearheaded by Senator Brown, who's no longer in Congress, but really kind of codifies some elements of the executive orders we saw in a Trump and Biden administration. I will say, in addition to removing unnecessary educational requirements for federal civil service jobs and other open federal positions, some elements that I think are worth noting that I really liked about the policy was leveraging USA Jobs, because we know that's kind of like the career navigation site for federal government, making it easier for that site to filter positions based on skills. And so leveraging that automation and use of tool to help people understand what jobs they're eligible for that based on their skill set. And I also love the element that also helps to provide STAR employees or people looking at these federal jobs with other opportunities for skill development and pathways once they are in the federal role. So it's really comprehensive and not just looking at the hiring practices, but also then the projection of that person's career in government after they get hired. I will also wanted to flag a Chance to Compete Act. This was when Senator Sinema was in Congress. This was one of her major priorities. And this bill would allow the Office of Personnel Management to develop and implement a plan for transitioning to using technical assessments for hiring into competitive service positions unless the hiring agency certifies that this is impractical. So again, it moves towards this competency-based approach in hiring. So instead of again really looking at competency-based assessment, skills assessment in the hiring process for federal jobs. And I did want to just note there was a plethora of EOs that came out this week from the new Trump administration. A Chance to Compete Act was included in one of them. So that's just something to look out for as well. And then lastly, the Allowing Contractors to Choose Employees for Select Skills Act, or the Access Act, extends the EOs that I just mentioned to include contract workers. So that was the main purpose of this bill, to ensure that workers in the contract space were not left out of these opportunities that we're talking about now. And again, all of these bills were done on a bipartisan basis, which is really exciting to see the momentum and support for this issue across the aisle. I wanted to just mention one thing before I wrap up my time and pass to Blair. I just want to say, while these are all exciting efforts, nothing has been fully passed or authorized on the congressional side. So everything I just mentioned, there's movement, but there hasn't been official passage. And as a result, there hasn't been official implementation other than some of the executive order activities that I mentioned. And of course, the work happening in states. I also want to say, one major stumbling block, which I'm so excited to hear from Peter and Nicole on some of the state work they're doing to implement this work effectively. Some of the major criticisms of the skills-based hiring movement is, okay, we move degree requirements from jobs, but we don't have the strategies necessary to then actually implement effectively and hire people based on skills. So something that I'm excited to talk more about today, and something that JFF is really spearheading, is how do we create the skills-based ecosystem around learners and workers, so then it's easier for employers to use these strategies to adopt skills-based hiring practices and really move the needle in this space. And so we're really thinking about, apprenticeship, advancing non-degree pathways, better TA from our federal and state leaders to support employers in navigating these ecosystems and the availability of resources and programs that are out there to date. So again, happy to talk more about that today as the conversation continues. But I think it's just a really important piece to note is that we can remove degree requirements, but how are we also creating systems change to meet the moment and respond to it effectively? So I will pause there and pass to Blair.
Thanks so much, Taylor, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be joining us. I'm Blair, and I'm excited to be following up Taylor. I think as Taylor shared, 2024 was a big year with a lot of exciting movement. More action is definitely needed, but we definitely did see a shift towards moving degree requirements and getting a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. I think we may have skipped ahead of one slide, so if we could go back one. There we go. I think a big reason for that was not only was there support on both sides of the aisle, but there was a ton of support from voters and citizens across this country. I just want to note that National Skills Coalition put out some polling earlier this year, and they noted that a majority of voters see this as an issue. And so we expect that it will remain an important one. I think one other big thing we saw is, if we go to the next slide, and there's more information that we'll be having coming out on this in the coming weeks. It's just that those places that did the EOs in legislation, there are now 26 states that have taken action in committing. We're seeing real change. So if you look at this graph very quickly, you'll see that the year before an action was taken, you can see how many jobs were open to STARS versus the 12 months after an action was taken. And this is for about 18 of the 26 states. You can see that above that dotted line, a tremendous number of jobs have been opened to STARS, and not just low wage jobs, which I think was an assumption, maybe a cynical assumption among many of us, but there's been middle, higher, and upper wage. So that's the good news. And we have a whole report out that we'll be doing a webinar on soon. And finally, the last thing I'd like to say is there's more to come. As Taylor shared, our partners at JFF and on other sides of the spectrum are all taking this time to figure out how to continue to advance the work. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the things that we're planning, which includes a policy agenda, a policy playbook, and continuing to support conversations and learning among government leaders. And so with that, I will turn it over to Paige, who will share one very exciting learning community, the Transformers in the Public Sector. Paige?
Thank you, Blair. So before I introduce our next speakers, I just want to visit really quick our Transformers in the Public Sector cohort that we launched this year. In an effort to help state agencies break down barriers for workers who are skilled through alternative routes, or STARS is the term that we use, a group of leaders from Arizona, California, Colorado, Connecticut, and Louisiana are collaborating and receiving targeted support from both us here at Opportunity at Work and the Volcker Alliance, focused on refining and implementing skills-first talent strategies over the next 12 months. So we're a couple months into the process now, and we're really excited about the work that they're doing. This initiative aims to provide the cohort and the tools and tactics to make measurable progress toward adopting skills-first practices, paving the way for economic mobility and greater access to government careers for STARS. We are very fortunate to be partnering with the Volcker Alliance on this cohort. And as you can see here, the 5 states we have listed here, we have 3 who are focused primarily on STARS hiring, and then 2 who are focusing more on STARS advancement and offering those opportunities to STARS to advance forward in public sector employment. I am super excited now to introduce Peter Morrissey from the Volcker Alliance and Nicole Tucker, who is from the state of Louisiana, as our next speakers. Peter?
Hey, Paige, thank you so much. Really appreciate the opportunity to introduce a little bit of the work from the Transformers in the Public Sector cohort today and share with everybody on this call how this group of state government leaders supported by the team at Opportunity at Work and Volcker is approaching this really sticky challenge, moving ahead. The important work of infusing a skills-first lens into our public systems is imperative for all of the reasons that Paige and that Blair and that Taylor noted, but it is a real serious undertaking happening both at the senior levels of government and in the guts of public institutions. So I'm excited to share a little bit about the approach of the cohort. We are just starting out on this path. So by way of positioning as partners with Opportunity at Work in this effort, I just wanted to share a little bit about my organization, the Volcker Alliance, whose mission is to empower the public sector workforce to solve the challenges facing our nation. When Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve and a lifelong public servant, started this organization, it was because he believed that putting public service at the center of our national character and building esteem for careers in government was an essential component of democracy. And I think that is true for everyone of every educational background. In furtherance of this work, Volcker maintains a portfolio of projects that focus on innovation in public sector talent. We do that because we recognize that adopting new practice in the public sector workforce and in public institutions can be challenging. It can come with real risks. So our team is always on the lookout for the opportunity to support leading-edge governments looking to change the way they recruit and hire and advance public servants through innovative and creative approaches. And I think this cohort is really one such example, which is why we're so grateful for the opportunity to collaborate with Opportunity at Work. Their deep expertise in how we can embed skills-first practices across the overall economy, I think, is a really natural expression in working with a cohort of states to embed skills-first practices in the policies and processes and culture of hiring and advancement for state employees, and really unleash STARS throughout state government. So I am grateful for that plus sign in the middle of our collaboration. Can we advance one more slide? Thank you. So Paige gave a little bit of summary of the cohort. I am not going to delve into project management rhythms for convening a cohort of 5 states, and I'm going to let Nicole Tucker from Louisiana give voice to how one state is participating in this work. But I do want to share a little bit about how our organizations have thought about approaching this challenge, which is a very real a nascent undertaking for many state governments. So we have been working to build a cohort experience for 5 states that stuck their hands up and said, we want to be leaders in this area, that it balances 2 key aims. One is to position state leaders who are already advancing skills-first practices to learn from each other and to talk to their peers across state lines in deeper and more tactile ways than they might have otherwise, to learn from each other. This is not a solo undertaking. You have many state leaders have analogs across the country dealing with the same set of challenges. We also want to equip them with tools and strategic insights and support needed to drive forward measurable change in their state context. So as you can see here on this slide, we have a line of activities that we're advancing to convene this cohort. We have a line of activities that we're advancing to support individual states through TA and coaching. Advance jointly, the coaching dimension includes work like strategic guidance on technical assistance to implement and sustain skills-based talent practices across the state, exclusive workforce data analysis, looking at the labor market in each geography, as well as analytic support in working through administrative data, support for building a compelling narrative that bolsters the case for skills-first hiring practices, and I think really broadly, focused capacity to help busy public servants who have been given this responsibility alongside many other responsibilities really move the ball in a focused and time-delineated manner. We are approaching this work in 2 phases. A first phase focused on scoping promising places to start and setting objectives and key results. This is a nascent area of work for many governments to really drive forward legislative action and executive orders. And we're also going to be soon advancing into a phase 2 focused on selecting and deploying interventions to help each state make progress against its goals. So comprehensive support for the states in the cohort, supporting them and learning from practice of the leaders who are at the front lines of this work. I'm going to share a few early observations from the first several months of engaging this cohort. I will be interested if it resonates with folks on the call working in the public sector context. I would hazard that I think some of these takeaways will ring true to those of you who have worked to drive change management work in the public sector context. We advance the next slide. So one more click. I want to make the first observation that a commitment from your principal, from a governor or a legislator, is a necessary condition of infusing skills-first practices into hiring and advancement, but it is not a sufficient condition. I think intuitively, everybody who's touched implementation work in government understands this. For all of the reasons that Blair and that Paige and that Taylor discussed, each of our participating states and dozens of others have made commitments to remove degree requirements from public sector jobs. But in most cases, simply removing the degree requirement is not a self-executing way of ensuring that there will be a dramatic increase in the number of stars who are hired into state government or advancing through it. There is significant implementation work from public servants who understand every element of the human resources process in government. We chose this cohort of 5 states from among many who put their hands up because its participants were well placed. They were seated at the right places in state government, usually central personnel agencies with strong relationships in front-end agencies. So they could both reach up to the center of government political actors and policymakers and also reach down into frontline employees who are going to be making the decisions that will govern whether or not there's a significant increase in STARS talent. Those lines of sight are really important, as I'm going to note. The public servants who were so positioned to advance this work need support and air cover to move ahead real reforms and to navigate complex webs of stakeholders who touch really many different elements of the personnel process. And they also need time and resourcing and support and bandwidth. This last dimension is something we're hoping to provide through this cohort. So that's insight 1. We can move forward to insight 2. We cannot boil the ocean, a phrase I heard relatively recently and am using a lot lately. We are urging each state to adopt a focused starting point because we think that's an essential and credible component of a real theory of change. So as we noted previously, in many states, removing degree requirements and implementing the skills-first vision is going to require a whole-scale shift in personnel decisions. And let me personify that process a little bit. The changes need to happen in all dimensions of the public sector HR process. And for the record, this is the case in the private sector as well, but government often operates under a few additional constraints. So for hiring, truly infusing a skills-first practice is going to require changes in strategic workforce planning, in needs analysis, in supporting documentation for hires like JDs and PDs, talent sourcing strategies, and selection and assessments to actually make decisions based on something other than the signaling device of a college degree. For advancement, adopting a skills-first practice implicates career pathing, talent development, investments in workforce development for incumbent employees, diagonal and lateral movement, and considerations for retention. Again, many different manifestations of an involved and often complex hiring or personnel process. In other words, it is not sufficient to delete a line in a document and expect that the nature of talent pipelines into your organization or through your organization are going to meaningfully change. An accommodating set of policies and implementation ecosystem was the wonderful word that Taylor used, is critical. And that is not a small ask. As a result of the comprehensive nature of this challenge, in working with the 5 states in our cohort, we have urged our members to narrow their focus and zero in on 1 or 2 key roles that data and evidence show to be well suited for the transition to skills-first lens. My colleague Nicole Tucker from Louisiana is going to share more about how Louisiana has bounded its work, where it has chosen to start in driving this forward, and why there were strategic alignment in their, I think, very prudent choices. In general, I would say some useful heuristics are roles with some degree of scale, where when you make the investment of changing administrative processes, you're likely to get good bang for your reform buck, as it were, where they are located across agencies so that you are able to have multiple external expressions of the changes states are making and multiple advancement routes, and you're acting in a coordinated, strategic, enterprise-like way, and with a set of willing agency partners, that somewhere in the frontline decision-making, there are stakeholders who are enthusiastic to change the way they do business. I think that nicely anticipates a third takeaway, which has really suffused a lot of this work, which is that culture eats policy. And I think that is an observation made so frequently it is near trite. But in this work, that implicates engagement with a lot of key stakeholders. Even with the right enabling policies and the right systems, actually changing how personnel decisions are made really requires shared foursquare belief that hiring and advancing on the basis of skills and knowledge, rather on the basis of something else like a degree or seniority or longevity, is the best way to build capacity in public sector organizations. That is sort of a belief, which I think is very well grounded in the evidence, but is something folks need to ascribe to and aspire to. Infusing this belief throughout state government requires thoughtful and proactive engagement with agency leaders. It requires working hard on the nexus between HR professionals who manage agency personnel processes and hiring managers who are actually filling roles. That is a key relationship we've been hearing from more and more. It requires engagement with state civil service commissions and the other instruments of democracy that allow individual voters out there in the world to have influence over the way that their public enterprises are composed, and other such wraparound authorities. It also requires engagement with bargaining units and labor in some contexts, where agreements on how eligibility for roles or advancement prerogatives for roles are structured is part of a negotiated agreement. All of this means that activating around this cohort requires marshaling powerful examples of how focusing in on skills is going to make the whole state workforce more effective, as well as expanding opportunities for future and current public servants to grow and advance. I am delighted that this narrative dimension in particular is a superpower of our friends at Opportunity at Work, and we're excited to be working with them to identify the leverage points to deploy their powerful narrative to win hearts and minds, as it were. It also requires new tools to help build a degree of comfort and confidence in changing course right on the front lines. That might be updates and changes to data management in an applicant tracking system or an HR management system to follow individual candidates of various educational and skills backgrounds through their hiring and career advancement. It might also be helping identify and pilot proven assessments to substitute for reliance on educational attainment, for instance, as a capacity signal. So an important narrative dimension and a tools and system dimension we think are really important to helping move the cultural dimension of this work forward. One last takeaway before I turn it over to Nicole to bring this to life in her state context, and that is this, that states are different from each other, but they have overlapping needs. The 5 states in our cohort are regionally and geographically and ideologically heterogeneous. They're different from each other. But in talking with each of their leaders, it's really exciting to learn about the ways they vary in Phoenix and in Denver and in Baton Rouge and in Sacramento and in Hartford. And as a government nerd, I would confess that the fact that each of these contexts is different is really earnestly fun. However, it is something of a relief in stewarding this cohort that the participating states really do have overlapping needs. And I think they are feeling increasingly resonant, and I suspect the members of the cohort would aver this as well. Not only can states learn from each other, they are sufficiently similar in needs that they can directly connect at the level of individual professionals and help build each other's shared capacity. But it also positions us at Opportunity at Work and at Volcker to anticipate the sorts of implementation support that are likely to be valuable. And these include guidance on talent sourcing strategies, emerging as a common need, approaches to updating and changing language in job descriptions and position descriptions, that help job seekers find their way into roles for which they are already suited. The implementation of modular skills taxonomies for overlapping target roles, which are themselves often common across this cohort. Assessments as of alternatives to degrees, understanding the field, what's available off the shelf, and how it can be implemented for a state context. Support in implementing metrics and measurement, and engagement strategies with end users in HR shops and in among hiring managers to help advance the hearts and minds dimension of this work. That similarity, I think, positions this cohort really well to use our time together, this 12-month cycle, to help each state measurably advance its commitment wherever it is in the maturity and life cycle of implementing skills-first hiring, and generate lessons that are going to be valuable for the other 45 states that are together moving in this direction, as well as leaders in all other public sector contexts. So that is generally high level. It is trying to speak to the observations and experiences of 5 different places. To really bring it to life, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Nicole Tucker from the Louisiana Civil Service Commission. Nicole is the leader of our collaboration in Louisiana, who have really been powerful trailblazers in the implementation of skills first practices, and I'm excited for her to bring this to life. Nicole?
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Tucker. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Louisiana State Civil Service. I want to thank Peter for that great intro, as well as Opportunity at Work for giving us, Louisiana, the opportunity to be a part of this inaugural cohort. As so many of them have already spoken about, being a part of something like this that is changing, hopefully, the hearts and minds of everyone and putting light on stars. It is not something you can do solo. So we were very excited to be selected to be a part of the cohort and to learn from other states, as well as teach other states and other viewers that are listening to hear kind of where we came from and where we are, just to kind of put some landscape for, Louisiana, how we became a part of the cohort and what our journey has been. First of all, Louisiana State Civil Service, we are a central human resources agency. We kind of have a hybrid model of centralized versus decentralized when it comes to different functions. But specifically for today, I kind of want to focus on recruitment and talent acquisition. We here at State Civil Service, we actually create all of the minimum qualifications for all classified state jobs. So that's centralized here at Louisiana State Civil Service. And then also when anyone wants to post a classified position for a vacancy, they have to go through us here at State Civil Service. So we're working with all state agencies on job postings, how to get applicants, as well as we screen those applicants to make sure that they qualify for the minimum qualifications that we have set. From there, we then kind of hand it off to state agencies, their HR and their hiring managers for that actual selection process. So I kind of want to set the stage on that as I talk, so you all understand what civil services role is and where that policy kind of comes in play, and also with us working with HR and hiring managers. So as Peter said, and I believe as Paige said also, the cohort, there's 2 kind of focus areas. Louisiana, we're specifically focusing on STARS hiring. And we actually selected for the 2 jobs that we want to focus on is actually HR and then what we call revenue tax officers or tax administration. And we specifically selected both of those jobs because we felt like, one, it would resonate. HR is a key role in all of this when hiring those stars and teaching hiring managers how to see stars and hire them within the workforce. So we felt like HR would be a good job to really focus on and see the data on hiring stars, as well as the revenue tax officers. every state public sector has a tax administration agency. So that was another one that was easily able to kind of explain to everyone. Everyone would kind of resonate with those titles. So we were really intentional with choosing both of those positions to kind of focus on when we're working through the data and we're working with Opportunity at Work and the Volcker Alliance with the cohort. But 2024 for us was a really big year. There were two main things in Louisiana that kind of happened. So we kicked off 2024 where we removed pre-employment exams. As you all know, states, public sector, some states still have pre-employment exams and some don't. For Louisiana, we did up until January 1st, 2024. And that change really came from after COVID, during COVID, everyone was experiencing the same thing as far as not having a lot of applicants, specifically in public sector. So we really looked at, okay, well, where is that coming from? What are the barriers, for the few that are able to apply, they may not be making the eligible list and qualified. And one of the things that we heard from our state agencies and stakeholders was that pre-employment exam. So we had heard that, few years into the pandemic, and we really didn't want to just remove the exam and not have anything in place. So we worked, really 2022 to 2024 on what can replace those exams. And that's where we came up with what we call the SCS Hiring Framework, our state civil service hiring framework. And basically that is a suite of competency-based resources. Taylor talked a lot about competencies and those competency-based assessments. That essentially is what the SCS hiring framework does. And with that, we actually require our state agencies when they are posting that they have to follow the steps within the hiring framework. There's 6 steps. And in those steps, there's, interview-based, competency-based interview questions. We have a bank that all of those banks are linked to the competencies that are needed for the jobs that the state agencies are hiring for. The first 3 steps of the 6 are the 3 that we require here at State Civil Service before an agency can post a job. And to be a little more specific, the hiring framework requirement is linked to the jobs that previously had that pre-employment exam. We have over 1,900 jobs, just to kind of give you all a picture of that. Of course, not all 1,900 jobs are posted at one time, but it is a significant amount of jobs that could be posted in the state at any given time. Not all of the jobs require the hiring framework, but we do require it on those jobs that previously had that pre-employment exam. Again, we wanted to give something in place or in lieu of the pre-employment exam. So with the hiring framework, agencies are required to actually showcase the competencies that are needed for the job. So many times we hear from applicants, I don't really know what the job is. I don't understand what this is. So many times we talk to HR and hiring managers and we ask them, well, what do you want this applicant to possess? What do you want, your top employee to have? And they can't answer it. So that's where we kind of linked everything back to our state of Louisiana competency model, which is over 50 competencies that we have come up with. And with that, we also have rubrics or the behaviors that specifically go with those competencies. It's easy to talk about skills and competencies and say we need critical thinking, we need someone to have accountability, but what does that really look like? And specifically, what does that look like in the job you're posting for? That's where the real challenge is. So we have kind of worked with agencies. Our team has come up with, again, that bank of resources for hiring managers and HR to use when they are posting jobs and selecting. The second thing that happened in 2024 for us happened in June of 24, where our governor signed the bill for us to remove degree requirements. And we're kind of working on changing that narrative, because the first thing people hear is, oh, you're removing degree requirements. Really, we are broadening that applicant pool. We're broadening the qualifications, and we added relevant experience, which allows those hiring managers to then look at the skills that that applicant basically possess. Whereas before, you kind of had, like Taylor talked about, that proxy of the degree was kind of a barrier. So, 2024, we were trying to remove these barriers to make sure that the stars even get on the eligible list. So that was kind of the big second piece that we added and we did for 2024. And we spent the second half of the year reviewing all 1,900 jobs and their minimum qualifications to see, do we need a degree on this? So we had to make sure that it met the legislation. And then also we looked and questioned a lot of the hiring managers on is a degree required for this? If we can't get anything concrete on this, then it does not require a degree, and that's where that relevant experience came into play. For the states that have gone through this, you all know that just removing the degree is just removing a line, but it also means that you're getting a lot of applicants. So with that, we understand that just because you have more applicants on the list does not automatically translate to more stars being hired. And that's kind of where Louisiana is with the cohort, is working through kind of what's our next step to help those HR managers, help hiring managers on being able to see the skills of the stars that are now on their list. I believe I'm at time, but I do want to pass it to Taylor, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone has any questions for us.
Thanks, Nicole. And I think I'm actually, just for purposes of time, going to pass it back to the opportunity at work team, so we can make sure that we have time for questions with the audience. I will just say one thing that I think Peter and Nicole mentioned that I want to underscore is that the importance of policy in creating this ecosystem so we can move towards this skills-based ecosystem that we want to see. And so excited, if we have time, would love to answer questions on how some states are doing that well and lessons that we can learn from them, and also how this obviously can translate and be scaled at the federal level.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for your input and expertise today. We are so lucky here at Opportunity Work to get to work with all of you, and are excited to continue our journeys moving forward with all of you as well. So we're going to open it up to some Q&A here. And it does look like we do have one question right now in the Q&A, and it's for Taylor. And the question is, how does JFF or a relevant entity work with local business in Arizona to understand evolving industry skill needs and ensure career pathways align with workforce demands? And how are these pathways made available for other employers to leverage? As someone based in Arizona, what opportunities exist for local businesses and industries, workforce organizations, or individuals to engage with and benefit from these career paths?
Great question, and thank you for putting that in the chat. Paige, I might send more comprehensive response so we can share as a follow-up, because there's so much I could say about Arizona, and I want to make sure we have time. A few high-level things that I would mention that are kind of recently coming out that's really exciting. So one of the things, and again, this is very tailored to a certain sector, but we have seen obviously a huge presence of the semiconductor sector settle around the Phoenix region. And in response, the governor has done a ton around supporting the main employers, including Intel, in creating talent pipelines to prepare them for open jobs that they open positions that they have. So they're investing a lot. The state's investing a lot in apprenticeship. So we've seen a huge state grant program come up around apprenticeship. So I would advocate for any employers on this call to look into that coming out of the governor's office and seeing ways that you can tap into it in your local area. The other thing that they're investing a lot in is shorter term rapid reskilling opportunities. Again, that's happening more regionally. For example, in the Phoenix region, Intel's partnering with Mesa Community College to create this boot camp around machinists for semiconductors. And it's basically a 2-week quick program. And it's almost, it's modeled like a pre-apprenticeship. So it prepares people to then go into this registered apprenticeship that Intel is operating. And what I think is so interesting about the work happening in Arizona, it's truly a public-private partnership. So it is the public sector providing a lot of seed investment for some of the talent development efforts, while relying heavily on the employer to ensure that they are hiring and placing people into these opportunities, and really relying on the employer to adopt these skills-based strategies we're talking about today. I will also say, and I know I'm using this one sector as an example, but we're seeing so much happen in this state around semiconductor. That's an area what's really unique, because there are so many different credentials and skills that someone needs across the spectrum of jobs that are related to the semiconductor sector. And so what I think is really powerful about what Intel is trying to do and other partners in the area is think about, like, hey, where are jobs that we don't need a 4-year degree or an advanced degree? And then how are we hiring? How are we marketing those jobs? And then how are we, again, backtracking to create talent pipelines into those positions. So we are ensuring that we're not just putting these arbitrary requirements on our job descriptions, but instead thinking more holistically about what's needed across the roles that we're looking for. And so I just think it's a really powerful approach. And I also think could be replicated and thought about with a lot of other sectors that are going to be continuously in demand over the next 5 years and a decade. And again, happy to respond with more Arizona specific work, especially around JFF. We run a Pathways to Prosperity community in Arizona is one of our key state partners. And again, that's about building the pathways infrastructure across education and workforce systems to move towards this more skills-based ecosystem in the state.
Awesome. Thank you, Taylor. We have another question. It says, are there any states in the cohort working on improving skills-based hiring and job placement of stars among, they specifically called out city, but they said really referring to any government contractors, or are there any relevant examples and best practices that we've seen in our work?
I can take that. We do not have a particular contractor nexus involved in the cohort right now. To see earlier point about sort of bounding, we're focusing in on specific sets of positions that are governmental, strictly defined. I have been aware, I had previously worked at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget on federal personnel issues, and there has been some federal activity to advance a skills-first regime for a variety of IT contractors advanced as part of the National Cyber Workforce and Education Strategy effort. That is a nationwide cybersecurity commitment that was developed. It's actually been a very long-running development over the last couple of administrations, culminating in a release of a set of policy recommendations last year, and included the transference or the integration of a non-degreed and skills-led regime for cybersecurity and IT contractors to the federal government, with a recommendation that states and localities do something similar. I know there has been some writing about that work. I can quickly Google and see if I can find any, but I am aware of that explicit push to the contractor nexus there. Others may have heard of something similar.
Yeah, and we're actually doing a small case on them, so we'll have more to share very soon.
Perfect. And then we have another question specifically around the cohorts. It says, has any of the states in the cohort experienced difficulties hiring for certain classes of work that have lower educational requirements but pay more in the private sector?
I can answer a little bit of that. So for us in Louisiana, healthcare in correctional facilities is specifically what comes to mind. So for us, healthcare, the jobs in state of Louisiana with those lower minimum qualifications are going to be like our nursing assistants, which is like your CNAs. Also, we call them residential service specialists, and those jobs actually work at our state operated developmental, intellectually developed and disabled client. So for that, we have within those surrounding areas, even though they're in a rural part of the state, they can easily go to, nursing homes, privately owned, clinics, and easily make more. So from a recruitment standpoint, we typically see them as one of our top turnover jobs every year consistently. Juvenile justice specialists, and then correctional guards, which I understand that's more public sector than the private, but you can easily find law enforcement and security type jobs in private industry. And we always are working with all of those state agencies on increasing compensation as much as they can. But it's always a struggle for them. And then the other jobs that I can think of is our administrative coordinators, which is like that clerical type job. They can easily go private industry and find a job that's going to pay them a little bit more.
Thank you, Nicole. I think we have time for just like a couple more. We did have a couple questions submitted beforehand. So one of them says, are there new HR policies and/or best practices to compensate, hire, and retain new talent in today's workforce demands?
I can take that one again or add a little bit of context for State of Louisiana. As far as best practices, we do not have anything specific, but we do have a plethora of pay mechanisms that we already have in place in the state of Louisiana. We like to say tools in the toolbox, and we like to pull out the certain tool that we need based on what that agency is experiencing. I will say we do have a rule for, what they would call extraordinary qualifications that gives the state agencies a little more flexibility on an individual basis. And then we have other pay mechanisms to address recruitment issues or turnover issues on more of a uniform, for everyone in that position or everyone in that job series. And we are a market-based compensation system. So we do a lot of research on the market of those jobs with our public and private sector. And then we kind of figure out, that sweet spot and also looking at the budget and what, we can afford as a state. So not necessarily anything new, but that's just kind of how we are set up here in state of Louisiana.
And Paige, I'll just add really quickly. Oh, sorry, I saw Peter come off too, but I'll be quick, Peter. I just wanted to add too. I think that's such a good question, and I think that's one of the most complicated pieces of this puzzle, right? So we can have like the policy, we can have the support and momentum, but the implementation and ensuring that every HR department across the country is adopting these strategies is really hard and is actually more related to culture shift. And I think TA and supporting HR teams in processing this work. And so one of the things JFF is pushing for this in this Congress and also with this new administration is like, how are we ensuring that Department of Labor and other relevant agency partners are providing the TA that's needed to employers, but also public sector partners at the federal level, but also at state and local levels? And how are we encouraging that type of partnership? Because we know that people need that support. And I think that is critical to really move the needle in this space. And I also would just add, be remiss, I know we all talk about AI all the time, but I do think that leveraging AI and tech advancements to support HR teams in this work will be really, really useful as we move into this next year and next 5 years, and these new technologies are more mainstream and adopted. Because if there are ways that can reduce some of that kind of, Nicole, to your point, just like the status quo and shifting and making sure that those things are done more effectively, efficiently through technology. Obviously, of course, working to reduce bias within AI tools and other issues that may come up. I think that will be critical in helping teams streamline activities, make it easier for them to adopt these practices, and again, move things in the right direction. So Peter, I'll pass to you because I know you came.
No worries. I will add one sentence, which is the one promising practice to deal with the forever problem of these sorts of pay challenges is for governments to view each other as collaborators and not competitors. I think that happens very naturally at the state level, where folks positioned like Nicole can act as a coordinating force and a market intelligence tool for all of the agencies throughout a given state government. It takes a little bit more work for local governments who need to be thinking in a consolidated way of where they're sitting with respect to pay, and thinking on how they can capture folks in the public service ecosystem and keep them within the broader public service ecosystem while enabling some internal movement. But definitely one thing that does not help is the process of agencies robbing directly from each other, rather than thinking about what shared offerings they can make to the broader marketplace.
Well, thank you. We do have a couple more questions in the Q&A, but we are at time right now. So we will make sure that we get those questions answered and sent out after the fact with the slides that we have today. Thank you again to our panelists, Nicole, Peter, Taylor, and Blair, for sharing with us today. And with that, I will pass it back over to Nicole Daniels just for next steps.
Thank you, Paige. Yes, as we close out the session, wanted to express sincere gratitude for everybody for attending this webinar today. Thank you for your engagement and the questions that you shared. A follow-up email will be sent out tomorrow with a recording of the webinar. And we hope today's session was valuable for you. We encourage you to complete the post-webinar survey. We'd love to hear your feedback. And we hope to see you at future events. Have a wonderful day.